Welcome to Reformed Thinking. We are really thrilled to have you joining us today.
Yeah, we really are. It is a great subject today.
We have a customized deep dive prepared just for you. We have pulled together this massive stack of study notes, some historical context, and a lot of theological analysis.
A whole lot of it.
Right. Think of us as your enthusiastic friends who just finished reading something astonishing. We just cannot wait to share the best insights with you.
Absolutely, because what we are looking at today is, well, it is staggering.
It really is. Our mission in this deep dive is to examine a very specific, highly dramatic historical event located in the book of Genesis. Specifically, we are looking at chapter 29, verses 21 through 30.
The infamous bait and switch.
That is the one. This is where Laban tricks Jacob into marrying Leah instead of Rachel. And to set our theological parameters right out of the gate, we are going to look at this event explicitly through the lens of Reformed theology.
Which is such a vital framework for this text.
Right. We will be leaning heavily on the Westminster Confession of Faith to understand a very specific dynamic. We want to see how God's sovereign providence works through and, rules over human sin.
That framework changes everything about how you read this. When we look at this passage, we are not reading some ancient record of family drama, and we are not just looking at a historical account of ancient Near Eastern wedding custom.
No, not at all.
We are looking at a masterclass in divine providence. It forces us to ask substantial questions about the nature of human rebellion and the certain faithfulness of God's covenant. The text exposes the reality that whatever a man sows, that he will also reap.
Yeah, the classic law of the harvest.
Precisely. We are going to see Jacob, a man who has a history of deceit, face the bitter harvest of his own methods. And through it all, we will see a God who never authors sin, yet sovereignly bounds and directs the sinful choices of fallen men to accomplish his holy decrees. It is a striking passage of Scripture.
Before we jump into the text itself, I want to clarify something for you, the listener. When we mentioned Reformed theology or the Westminster Confession of Faith, that might sound like intimidating academic jargon.
It can sound very dense, sure.
But at its core, we are talking about a way of reading the Bible that recognizes God is actually in control of the details.
Yes, total control.
He is not watching the events of human history unfold and then reacting to them. He is actively orchestrating history to bring about his intended ends, even when the humans involved are making terrible, selfish decisions.
That is such an accurate way to frame it.
So as we walk through this story, keep that in the back of your mind. We're watching a messy, chaotic human scam take place, but there's a divine architect overseeing the entire blueprint.
The Westminster divines, when they gathered in the 17th century to articulate these doctrines, were very careful to thread the needle between two extremes.
Tell us about those extremes.
Well, on one side, you have fatalism. That is the idea that human choices do not matter because everything is just a rigid script. On the other side, you have the belief that God is simply a bystander hoping things work out for the best.
Right, like he is crossing his fingers.
Yeah, and Reformed theology rejects both of those ideas. It teaches that human beings make real consequential choices, and yet God's providence flawlessly governs those choices. This Genesis narrative is one of the clearest biblical illustrations of that reality.
Okay, let us unpack this setup because the context is everything here. We find Jacob having labored for 7 long years for the right to marry Rachel.
7 years of manual, grueling labor.
Yeah, herding sheep in the blazing heat and the freezing cold. And the text gives us this incredibly romantic detail. Those 7 years felt to him like only a few days because of his intense affection for her.
It is a beautiful line.
It paints a picture of a man driven by love. Anyone who has ever been wildly infatuated with someone can relate to that feeling. Time just flies by.
It does. But then the tone of the narrative changes drastically.
It pivots sharply in verse 21. Jacob approaches his uncle Laban and bluntly demands his wage. He says, "Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her."
The romanticism drops immediately.
It really does. We get this blunt, almost jarring demand. What stands out to you about Jacob's tone here? Because when I read it, it drips with a sense of entitlement.
That is the exact right word for it, entitlement.
He does not view this marriage as a covenantal blessing from God. He views it as a transactional wage that he has earned through his sweat.
What is fascinating here is the sudden shift in the narrative flow. Moses, the human author, is showing us a patriarch whose spiritual vision is entirely eclipsed by physical fixation.
His eyes are just locked onto what he wants.
Right, and the Hebrew syntax of Jacob's demand underscores that sense of entitlement you mentioned. He is not requesting a blessing. He is demanding a paycheck. He says, "My days are completed."
It is entirely contractual.
Yes, and this exposes a condition of the human heart that we can call the idol of the flesh. The text notes earlier Jacob's intense fixation on Rachel's physical appearance. It specifically mentions her beautiful form and appearance.
He is completely captivated by how she looks.
And this idolatry, where he elevates a physical desire above his submission to the Creator, completely blinds him. He wants the gift far more than he wants the giver.
He has taken a good thing, the desire for a spouse, and elevated it to an ultimate thing.
Absolutely. And whenever a human being does that, it creates an enormous vulnerability.
I want to push back on that just a little bit for the sake of the discussion.
Please do.
Some people might read this and say, hold on. Jacob worked manual labor for 7 years. He put in the time. Does not the Bible generally reward hard work?
It certainly praises a strong work ethic.
Right. So why are we calling him entitled just for asking for what he earned? It seems like a standard contractual fulfillment. He did the time, so he is asking for the reward. Why is that considered an idol rather than just good business?
That is a very fair question to raise. The issue is not that Jacob worked hard, nor is it wrong that he expected the contract to be honored. The issue lies in his heart posture and his reliance on the flesh.
The internal motivation.
Yes. Remember who Jacob is. He is the heir to the Abrahamic promise. He's the one who received the vision at Bethel, where God promised to bless him and bring him back to the land.
God literally opened the heavens to him with the ladder of angels.
Exactly right. But in this moment with Laban, there is no mention of God. There is no prayer. There is no seeking of the Lord's favor. Jacob's entire focus is reduced to a crude transactional demand centered entirely on physical gratification.
Just give me my wife.
That I may go in unto her. It is the language of consumption. When a desire, even a legitimate one like marriage, consumes your vision to the point that you view it as something you can simply purchase with your own works, it has become an idol.
Wow, that is heavy.
You have begun to trust in your own cleverness and your own labor rather than the God who provides.
That makes a lot of sense. The vulnerability that creates is such a crucial point because his eyes are entirely set on physical gratification, because he's rushing toward the fulfillment of his own desires. He completely fails to detect Laban's calculating nature.
He does not see it at all.
He is so focused on the prize that he does not see the trap. If we bring this into our modern context, it looks a lot like modern hustle culture or legalism.
Oh, absolutely. The parallels are striking.
We see people operating under this assumption that if they put in the hard work, if they check all the moral boxes, they are automatically entitled to earthly rewards. They treat God or the universe like a cosmic vending machine.
The vending machine theology, it is everywhere.
You put in your 7 years of good behavior, and out pops the perfect spouse, the perfect career, the perfect life. Jacob believes his grueling labor has earned him the right to his idol.
Believing that hard work automatically guarantees the fulfillment of our fleshly desires is a trap. Jacob's affections are disordered. Instead of looking toward the God who provides, he is relying entirely on his own works.
And Laban is just waiting for that.
Yes. This blunt transactional demand from Jacob is precisely what triggers Laban's deceptive, calculated response. Laban hears a man demanding his wage, and Laban, being the ultimate worldly pragmatist, sees an opportunity to exploit that desperation.
Jacob shows his cards, and Laban takes advantage.
Jacob is focused entirely on the physical union, while Laban is focused on the pragmatic social contract and how to manipulate it for his own economic gain. Laban is essentially listening to Jacob's impatience and realizing he holds all the leverage.
It is like someone going to buy a used car, and they are so infatuated with the shiny exterior that they ignore all the red flags.
They do not even look under the hood.
Right. The salesman knows they are emotionally compromised, so he slips all sorts of terrible clauses into the contract. Jacob is emotionally compromised by his idol.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Here's where it gets highly interesting as we move into the actual deception. This brings us to the harvest of this situation. Laban does not just quietly pull a switch. He throws a massive public feast.
A huge communal event.
He gathers all the men of the place. On the surface, it looks like a legitimate, honorable celebration. But under the cover of night, Laban substitutes his older daughter, Leah, for Rachel. Jacob consummates the marriage in the absolute dark.
The logistics of this are something we really need to pause and examine.
I have to ask about that. How does someone actually pull off this kind of scam? It seems like something out of a sitcom, but this is a historical event.
To understand the mechanics of the deception, we have to look at ancient Near Eastern wedding customs. These celebrations were not brief, 2-hour ceremonies in a brightly lit building.
Like we have today.
Right. They were week-long festivals characterized by extensive feasting and, yes, heavy drinking. The text tells us Laban gathered all the men and made a feast. The environment is loud, chaotic, and celebratory.
Jacob's senses would have been completely dulled.
Absolutely. Furthermore, in that culture, the bride would be heavily veiled. She would not be mingling and chatting with the guests. She would be escorted to the bridal tent in silence.
So she is covered and quiet.
Add to that the absence of modern lighting. Once the sun went down, the tents were incredibly dark, lit only by small oil lamps, if at all.
So it is pitch black.
Pitch black. You have a groom who has been participating in a feast, a bride who is completely veiled and culturally expected to remain silent, and an environment of total darkness. Laban uses all of these cultural elements as a smokescreen for his fraud.
That paints a vivid picture. Laban weaponizes the culture itself to pull off the scam. And then we get to verse 25. The morning light brings the jarring revelation.
The sun comes up.
The text says, behold, it was Leah. We have to talk about the shock of that morning. It has to be one of those awkward, horrifying realizations in human history.
Truly horrifying.
Imagine the psychological weight of the sun coming up and realizing the person next to you is not who you thought it was.
We absolutely do need to look closely at that moment. Let us examine the specific Hebrew word used in that morning revelation. The text uses the particle hina.
Hina. What does that translate to?
It translates as behold. In Hebrew narrative discourse, this word functions as a literary pointer. It signals a sudden, shocking shift in perspective. It conveys extreme shock.
Like a jump scare in a movie.
Precisely. The emphasis of the sentence is not on the act of waking up. It is entirely on the identity of the woman. Behold, it was Leah. Jacob's eyes had been closed to the truth while his heart was set on his own desires.
And the illusion shatters.
It shatters completely. And then, when Jacob confronts Laban, he uses a very specific Hebrew verb. He asks, why then have you deceived me?
The word for deception there is fascinating.
It is the word Rama. This is structurally and theologically significant. If we trace the frequency of this specific root word, we find it is the precise word Isaac used back in Genesis 27.
To describe how Jacob stole Esau's blessing.
Yes. Isaac told Esau, your brother came deceitfully and has taken away your blessing. The human author deliberately uses this exact term to show the listener that the supplanter is now the one supplanted.
So Moses, writing this down, is winking at the reader. He is using the exact same vocabulary to connect the two events. The beguiler is beguiled.
It is a deliberate theological connection.
This brings us right into the reformed concept of the law of the harvest, or lex talionis. Now, for our listener, lex talionis is just a fancy Latin term for the principle of retribution. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap.
Right. It is essentially the biblical version of karma, though governed by a personal God rather than an impersonal force. The irony is almost too heavy to carry.
It really is staggering.
Think about the sheer psychological weight of that morning for Jacob. This is a man who previously exploited his own father's physical blindness to steal a blessing.
He preyed on his father's lack of sight.
He used a physical garment, the hairy clothing of his brother, as a physical cover to trick a blind old man. And now, years later, he is tricked by the darkness of night and the physical cover of a bridal veil.
The symmetry is chilling.
It is a literal historical manifestation of the law of the harvest. The darkness of the scene is not circumstantial. It carries a heavy moral atmosphere. It highlights the hiddenness and disorder of the act. God is allowing Jacob to taste the exact flavor of his own medicine.
And we cannot overlook Laban's role in this. His public feast is a masterclass in secular philosophy.
How so?
Well, he uses the guise of public hospitality, community celebration, and tradition to completely mask his private, calculated treachery. He hides an enormous lie behind a visible public celebration.
He uses the party to hide the crime.
The public nature of the feast makes the fraud even more striking because he is carrying out his deception right beneath the appearance of social propriety. Laban is the kind of man who would shake your hand with a smile in public while simultaneously picking your pocket.
He would absolutely thrive in modern corporate middle management.
Oh, without a doubt.
He is the guy hiding the most destructive clauses in the terms and conditions right at the bottom of the contract. He knows you will just click accept because you want the product.
He preys on your desire.
So what does this all mean when the sun comes up and the truth is out? We shift from the shock of the morning to the ensuing confrontation. Jacob confronts his uncle with entirely justified, righteous anger.
He is furious.
"What is this you have done to me? Did I not labor for you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" And Laban's response is bone-chilling.
It is totally devoid of empathy.
He does not offer an apology. He does not ask for forgiveness. He offers a cold policy. He claims that local custom forbids giving the younger daughter in marriage before the firstborn.
It is just a bureaucratic excuse.
And then in the very next breath, he extorts 7 more years of hard labor from Jacob in exchange for Rachel.
This raises a vital point about the arrogance of pragmatism. Laban's defense contains a staggering amount of irony. He cites a rule protecting the firstborn, and he weaponizes that rule against Jacob.
Against Jacob, of all people.
He speaks this principle about the older and the younger right into the face of the very man who built his entire life, his whole future, on bypassing the firstborn. Laban's words echo Jacob's own history perfectly.
That is just incredible. The narrative deepens the reversal here. Jacob is forced to stand there and hear language about the rights of the firstborn in a context where he is the injured party.
But Laban's appeal to custom is nothing but a self-serving justification. If this custom was truly the issue, he had 7 years to disclose it.
You could have mentioned it on day 1.
Instead, he withheld the truth until after the marriage was consummated. He trapped Jacob.
I want to pause on Laban's character for a second because we often throw around the theological term total depravity when discussing Reformed theology.
It is a core tenet.
A lot of people hear that and think it means every person is as evil as Adolf Hitler. But that is not what the term actually means, right? Laban seems like a perfect case study for what total depravity actually looks like in everyday life. Could you break down that concept for us, using Laban as the example?
I would be glad to. You are correct that total depravity does not mean a person is as evil as they could possibly be. Instead, it means that sin has tainted every part of human nature: the mind, the will, and the emotions.
Every faculty is corrupted.
There is no part of us that is untouched by the fall. Look at Laban. His mind is depraved because he uses his intellect to rationalize his deceit, appealing to local custom as a logical defense.
He thinks his way out of guilt.
His will is depraved because he actively chooses to commit fraud for financial gain. And his emotions are depraved because he shows zero empathy or paternal care for his daughters.
He commodifies them.
He treats a divine institution, the covenant of marriage, like a bartering chip for cheap labor. He tells Jacob to finish Leah's bridal week, and then he will give him Rachel for another 7 years of work. He views these women as economic assets.
It is pure exploitation.
He is the ultimate pragmatist. He believes that economic ends entirely justify his deceptive means.
That is a brilliant way to explain it. Sin affects the mind, the will, and the emotions. Laban is completely bankrupt in all 3 areas when it comes to his family.
It is a devastating reality.
And honestly, this section holds up a very uncomfortable mirror to our modern world, and specifically to modern ecclesiastical strategies. We see this all the time in seeker-sensitive pragmatism in churches.
That is a harsh but fair comparison.
You see church leaders justify their actions by appealing to what works or what is culturally expected rather than what is objectively true according to God's word.
It is the exact same spirit.
It is the idea that if we can just get bodies in the door, it does not matter if we water down the message or use manipulative marketing tactics.
That is a highly relevant application for you to consider. Laban prioritizes the traditions of men, the local customs, over covenantal integrity and truth. He sacrifices truth on the altar of pragmatic success.
He abandons the right thing for the profitable thing.
He uses the letter of local law to violate the spirit of truth. And whenever individuals or churches adopt that mindset, whenever they decide that the ends justify the means, or that cultural relevance is more critical than biblical fidelity, they are walking in the way of Laban.
They are trying to outsmart God.
They are attempting to negotiate with God's providence using worldly tactics. But as we see in this text, those pragmatic schemes always result in devastating structural damage. You cannot build a righteous foundation using deceptive materials.
Let us look closely at that damage, because the collateral fallout hits the women the hardest. This leads to this incredibly messy, heartbreaking family dynamic. Polygamy formally enters the narrative here.
A major shift in the household.
Jacob completes Leah's bridal week, and then he is given Rachel. The text also introduces Zilpah and Bilhah as maidservants, and then Moses writes a very plain but devastating sentence. Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah.
The home is immediately divided.
The household is fractured. Now, before we get into the emotional wreckage, we should clarify how the Bible handles polygamy, because skeptics often point to passages like this and claim the Bible endorses it.
We must clarify right away that the Bible is being entirely descriptive here, not prescriptive. Scripture is recording what happened. It is not commending it as a divine ideal.
God is not setting up a model for us to follow.
From the very beginning in Genesis, specifically chapter 2, the creational mandate for marriage is one man and one woman joined in a covenant union. Whenever the biblical narrative portrays departures from that creational order of monogamy, starting with Lamech in Genesis 4, it consistently reveals the massive fallout and sorrow that follows.
It is a string of disasters.
The introduction of polygamy here is not celebrated. It is the beginning of a deeply fractured domestic arrangement born out of deceit, not truth. The biblical authors do not always pause the narrative to preach a sermon condemning an action. Instead, they show you the miserable consequences of that action.
The narrative does the heavy lifting. The emotional fallout is just brutal to read. You have divided affections. Jacob's blatant favoritism fractures the home. It breeds jealousy, rivalry, and intense trauma.
The psychological toll is massive.
Let us imagine Leah's position in this household for a second. She is fully recognized legally and socially as a wife. She belongs in the covenant household, yet she is completely uncherished.
She is the unintended wife.
She lives constantly under the heavy shadow of comparison. Her husband's heart is manifestly inclined toward her sister. The home is emotionally divided, and partiality always breeds sorrow. It is a heartbreaking situation. You can almost feel the tension in the tents.
The tragedy of Leah demonstrates that sin is never contained. Laban's single act of deception radiates outward, corrupting the entire family structure. And the introduction of the maidservants, Zilpah and Bilhah, plants the seeds for even more complexity in future tribal conflicts.
It just keeps escalating.
These women are not ornamental details in the text. They will become active participants in the bitter competitions surrounding childbearing. The household becomes an arena for jealousy.
It sounds like a complete failure.
But this brings us to a crucial theological reality. The covenant line of promise is preserved in spite of the patriarch's massive failures, not because of any inherent virtue on their part. The covenant family is profoundly compromised.
Jacob is flawed.
Laban is corrupt, the marriages are disordered, yet God's saving plan moves forward.
I want to stop right there because this is where a lot of people struggle. If God is sovereign and he is orchestrating history, does that mean God tricked Jacob?
That is the big question.
Did God force Laban to be greedy so that Jacob would learn a lesson? That sounds like a valid objection. If God is using this chaos for his own purposes, does that not make God the author of the sin? How do Reformed thinkers balance that tension without making God the bad guy?
That is the most critical question we can ask when dealing with the doctrine of providence. To answer it, we turn to Chapter 5 of the Westminster Confession, which is a brilliant summary of what Scripture teaches on this exact issue.
What does Chapter 5 say?
Chapter 5 states that God's providence extends to all his creatures and all their actions, from the greatest even to the least. It acknowledges that God's providence extends itself even to the first fall and all other sins of angels and men.
So he is overseeing the sin.
Yes. Yet, and this is the vital distinction, it does so in such a way that the sinfulness proceeds only from the creature and not from God. God is never the author of sin.
Could you break that down a bit more? How can God plan something without being the author of the sin involved in it?
Theologians often explain this using the concept of primary and secondary causes. God is the primary cause of all things, meaning he sustains the universe and decrees whatsoever comes to pass.
He's the foundation of reality.
But he works through secondary causes, which are the actual choices, desires, and actions of human beings. Think of wind blowing against a sailboat.
Okay, the sailboat analogy.
The wind provides the energy, but the shape and condition of the sails determine how the boat moves. Laban's heart was already greedy and deceitful. God did not inject greed into Laban.
Laban was doing what Laban wanted to do.
Laban chose his sin freely, according to his own corrupted nature. Yet, God sovereignly governed the boundaries and timing of Laban's wicked choices so that his own holy purposes were accomplished.
God channels the sin.
What Laban intended for selfish economic gain, God overruled for wise, righteous, covenantal purposes. God is not the author of sin, but he is the master of it.
So God is using the natural bent of Laban's greedy heart to accomplish a completely different goal. Laban thinks he's just getting free labor, but God is actually using Laban as an instrument.
An instrument of divine discipline.
So what does this divine discipline look like for Jacob? God is actively stripping Jacob of his fleshly cunning. Jacob has to learn the hard way that the blessings of the covenant cannot be secured through manipulation or deceit.
He is being humbled on a massive scale.
The God who met him at Bethel has not abandoned him. God is schooling him through painful providence. God is teaching Jacob to depend entirely on him rather than relying on his own skill in tricking people.
This specific dynamic completely refutes the modern prosperity gospel.
Let us talk about that.
Prosperity gospel falsely promises that obedience and faith will guarantee a trial-free life of immediate material ease. It claims that if you just have enough faith, or if you just follow all the rules, God is obligated to make you wealthy and comfortable.
Which completely contradicts Jacob's experience here.
Look at Jacob. He fulfilled his initial 7-year contract with absolute integrity. He worked hard. Furthermore, he was exactly in the center of God's geographical will, having gone to the land of his relatives as instructed.
He was where he was supposed to be, doing what he was supposed to do.
Yet he faced bitter betrayal. Being in the center of God's will does not exempt a believer from the discipline of the Lord or the deceit of the world. God acts as a sovereign pedagogue.
A master teacher.
A master teacher who uses even the wrath and treachery of men like Laban to shape, refine, and sanctify his chosen servants.
I really appreciate that image of God as the sovereign pedagogue. It completely changes how you view hardships. Your trials might actually be the very tools God is using to shape you.
They are the classroom.
It removes the panic when things go wrong because you realize the classroom is still under the teacher's control.
Yeah.
But we cannot just leave Jacob in the dark, and we cannot just leave our listener with a heavy lesson on discipline.
We need the resolution.
We have to move from the law and the discipline to the gospel. We need to show how God brings redemption out of this specific, messy household disaster. Because God does something completely unexpected with Leah, the unloved bride.
Indeed he does. From the standpoint of human desire, Leah is the unwanted woman. Jacob labored for Rachel and received Leah through fraud.
She is totally marginalized by her own husband.
Yet, redemptive history consistently shows a pattern of divine election where God overturns human preference. He utilizes the overlooked, the rejected, and the marginalized to highlight a staggering truth.
What is that truth?
Salvation relies entirely on divine grace, not human attractiveness or merit. God chooses the unloved bride, Leah, to bear sons who are central to the future of Israel. From Leah's womb comes Judah.
The tribe of Judah.
And from the line of Judah, the royal line emerges. We see David come from this line, and eventually this leads to the Messiah himself. The rejected wife becomes the instrument of covenant advancement.
That gives me chills. God looks at the brokenness, the favoritism, the absolute mess of this polygamist household, and he says, watch what I can do with this.
He brings beauty from ashes.
He brings the line of the tribe of Judah through the unloved wife. It just proves that God's choice is based on his sovereign decree, not our worldly standards of beauty or success. He does not need our perfect performance to accomplish his will.
Grace is entirely unmerited.
And this sets up a robust Christological contrast. When we look at Jacob, we see a deeply flawed bridegroom. He has divided affections, he is susceptible to deceit, he favors one wife over another, he is part of the problem. Contrast Jacob with Jesus Christ.
The contrast is breathtaking. Jacob is a flawed patriarch who cannot establish a righteous and undivided household. His limitations prompt the reader to look beyond him.
We need a better husband.
The brokenness of this patriarchal household generates a longing for a perfect covenant head. If Jacob is a bridegroom whose home is marked by sorrow and deceit, Christ is the true bridegroom who loves his bride, the church, with perfect holiness and constancy.
That is a beautiful picture.
Jacob's marriages arise through deception and hiddenness. Christ secures his bride in absolute truth. Jacob's home is fractured by rivalry. Christ gathers one people to himself in perfect peace. Jacob divides his affection. Christ gives himself wholly for his church.
Think about the labor involved too. Jacob labored for 7 years to secure a beautiful bride, but he received a veiled deception in the dark.
A total fraud.
Christ, the true bridegroom, labored with a lifetime of perfect obedience, and he went to the cross fully knowing that his bride, the church, was thoroughly sinful.
He saw the ugliness clearly.
He was not tricked into marrying a flawed bride. He chose her. He endured the darkness of Calvary to purchase her with his own blood in order to make her holy and without blemish. Christ secured his bride through sacrificial love, not through worldly manipulation or pragmatic contracts.
That is the indicative of the gospel we must rest in. The passage humbles us by showing the failures of men, but it magnifies the absolute faithfulness of God.
It points us straight to Jesus.
It points us directly to Christ, who did not deceive to gain a kingdom, but allowed himself to be betrayed to purchase a people. He took the shame and the sin upon himself to give us his perfect righteousness.
And that changes how we live today.
This truth empowers our obedience. We do not have to rely on our own Laban-like pragmatic schemes or chase our Jacob-like idols of the flesh, because our true bridegroom has perfectly secured our future.
What a place to land. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. We have spent an hour looking at ancient deceits, hidden agendas, and the painful exposure of the morning light.
A lot of darkness in these tents.
I want you to reflect on your own life right now. What veils are you using to force your own desired outcomes? What pragmatic schemes are you hiding in the dark, hoping they will secure the blessing you feel entitled to?
That is the real question for the heart.
Consider how the inevitable morning light of God's providence will eventually reveal the truth of your reliance on fleshly schemes. You cannot outmaneuver God, so drop the veils, cast down the idols, and trust the true bridegroom who deals with us in grace and absolute truth. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive on Reformed thinking. We will catch you next time.